Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out to listen to Kimber Glidden here. We're going to have a conversation about what's happened to her. We'll get to that in just a moment. I'm going to start by reading our land acknowledgement. We are in the traditional homelands of the 4 bands of the Spokane tribe of Indians: Upper Band, Middle Band, Lower Band, Chewelah Band. Since time immemorial, the Spokane tribe of Indians has lived and cared for these grounds, identifying themselves as flesh of the earth. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We show gratitude to the land, river, and peoples who have been fishing, hunting, harvesting, and gathering here for generations. May we learn from one another's stories so that we may nurture the relationship of the people of Spokane tribe and to all those who share this land. Okay.
That just about said it all.
Definitely. So, Kimber, thank you so much for coming out. I know these folks are really excited to hear from you, and I personally just want to say I'm really grateful for giving us some of your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's lots of news that interviews I've done, but this is my first live, so thank you guys for taking the time to come out this evening.
We'll get used to it. Yeah. Can you start by telling us just a little bit about yourself? So where are you from? What were you doing before becoming director? And what led you to this position?
Well, that's great because it puts things in context because as this story unfolds, my context got changed. So my husband is from Coeur d'Alene, and we met in Alaska, moved back to North Idaho in 2017. So there I was in finance and insurance, had worked previously in libraries when our kids were young, and when we moved here, I didn't really want to get back into that. So, and they didn't want me to work at all. But then there was a part-time job that came available in the Sandpoint Library, so I took that. Before too long, part-time turned into full-time. I ended up being the Children's Services Coordinator and Interim Director at Sandpoint, and did that for 4 years, and the position as director came open in Bonners Ferry, which is where we were living. So perfect, and I wasn't straddling two communities anymore, get to settle in the community which I live, so it was a really exciting opportunity. I am a mom and a grandma, and I've been a foster mom, and we've hosted international exchange students, fish and hike. I really miss the fishing in Alaska. So, there's all of these things we would entertain, and we had this, just beautiful friends, so we were looking forward to continuing that here.
Okay, awesome. And you recently got some chicks, is that right? Did you get some?
We did. Yeah. Yesterday, we had 31 new chicks because we have a little small farm in North Idaho. So orchard and animals, we've raised hogs, we have ducks, lots of ducks, and chickens. And now, we got more chickens. Oh, and rabbits. My husband loves the rabbits. I could do without the rabbits.
So the library received an award for Best Small Library at least once, and they've received other awards as well. What made it deserving of of those awards, and what was the role and reputation of the library before some of these events went down?
So for anybody who's not familiar, Bonners Ferry is way up toward the Canadian border, so really small, not a lot of opportunities for things going on. So the library really has always served as like this community hub, and it's always been a little bit cutting edge. The reason it won the award in 2017 was because there was a partnership with MIT to bring a fab lab, which was like a STEM lab. So there's a CNC machine, there's laser cutters, we had 3D printers, there's vinyl, like the big industrial vinyl. And so that was in partnership to help people in rural communities, like for job training and opportunities, and to introduce students into some STEM opportunities. So that was why it won then. And it also won in 2002. A national award, and that was for outstanding service. And then one other fun little caveat that it has is it has a Idaho State Gem designation, and so it's the only library in Idaho that had achieved that status, and it is because it's such a community gathering place. And so necessary for the small remote community.
What's a CNC machine?
I don't know what CNC stands for.
Oh, what's it do?
Anybody? It's so it is. They are it's like a big router machine. So you can make prototypes. You can run depending on the bit that you have for it. It is literally like a huge router, and so you can those beautiful metal cutouts you see in like home stores and the trees and all that, they'll cut out those. You can make signs. We have one man who comes in and does like prototypes for things he's building for his airplane.
Oh.
So yeah, there's a definite commercial application for it.
Cool. So you became director in December of 2021, right?
Correct.
So did the problems that emerged, did they start right away? What was the sort of buildup, and when did you first have an inkling something is going on here?
So I'm not going to get into the weeds on it, but there had been an ongoing personnel issue, which is why I kind of delayed taking the position. And it was supposed to be over by December. So that was like in the background, but not super important. And then there was this wonderful 2-month honeymoon period. So nothing really happened until February. And in February, and I had no inkling. It was just out of the blue. And so in February, I had a mom come up to me at the circulation desk, and she asks me if the library had genderqueer. And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know. So we looked it up in the card catalog and we didn't have it. And she wouldn't stop. Well, would you get it? I'm like, well, I don't even know what the book is really about. So I checked it out from another library and I read the book. And then when she came in a couple of days later, I let her know that probably not for our community. We're very conservative. We don't have a large audience for materials like that. And so she's like, well, what if somebody wanted it? I said, well, then I'd get it on interlibrary loan. And then she stops. Well, so you'd get it for somebody? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm a public librarian. That's kind of what we do. And so it keeps happening, and she's not accepting my answer. And then finally she gets out of me, it's like, look, if I had 10 people or so come up and want the same book, I would have to review it for an addition to the collection, because that would be my duty at that point. And that was what she was looking for. So now I have another mom and her husband who come in, and they don't want sexually explicit material or pornography or pedophilia in the library. And I'm like, well, can you show me the materials that you're concerned about? Well, you don't have any materials. This woman is an avid library user. So I asked her, please show me what materials you are concerned about. Well, there was this one book that my little boy checked out, and it had a boy wearing a tutu. Well, what is the title of this book? And she couldn't remember, of course, and so my children's librarian and I went down and we looked through the entire children's collection, and the only book we could come up with actually was a pig family, and the pig brother stole the tutu from the pig sister and wore it on his head and was riding around with a bicycle. That was the only one we could find. This is a true story. You can't make this up. And so anyway, she's getting herself really worked up. And I said to her, I'm going to ask you to trust your experience with the library. Please just trust your experience. She looked at me right in the face and she says, I don't know what your agenda is. And now they're showing up at board meetings. They're, and the labeling starts. You're grooming children. There's pornography in the library. How dare you? And the titles that are now being brought up are part of the titles that are in that national dialogue. All boys don't wear blue. The Poet X. So any book that has LGBTQ plus themes or characters, anything that might concern Black Lives Matter or critical race theory. There's a list going around Idaho that has about 400 titles for middle school and elementary children that they want banned, including Who Was Frederick Douglass, which the library does now have. A generous patron donated that, so we added it to the collection.
When you said you moved the library board meetings, but they were still able to come to those, is that right? Or
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they did continue to come, so this was a regular thing, them showing up?
Mm-hmm. And let's see, we were in the August board meeting, and in that one, same exact rhetoric about, protecting the children. And I got threatened with if I was to harm any small child, a millstone would be put around my neck and I would be cast into the sea. And then let's see, another man biblically cursed me and then said, I would be surprised if you weren't already experiencing these things. That was fun. And then the woman who threatened with the millstone went out and blew the shofar horn again. And she did show up at one point in July and actually blow the shofar horn at the front of the library, at the back of the library, and then drive off. And at that time, we didn't know who it was. And we had turned the security footage over to the police department, and they couldn't figure out who it was because she had screens on her license plates.
Okay. You mentioned the American Redoubt. For people in the audience who may not know what that is, what at least as far as you understand it, what is that movement?
So the American Redoubt is made up of Christian nationalist patriots who are anti-government, anti-tax faction who want to take over Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the western parts of Washington and Oregon, and create what they consider the American Redoubt. It is very much an extremist ideology, and they are they're an interesting and scary group of people. There's some realtors who market specifically to people who would be considered preppers, or tired, Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the Patriot Front, all of these types of people who have a really extreme ideology, where in one of the real estate videos is where women are nurturing and men are strong and productive. And so, women shouldn't work, women shouldn't vote, we should be home nurturing children. Everybody's homeschooled, we grow gardens, and the men go out and do all of the work and hunt and fish and, get rid of schools and libraries and museums and the Restorium. They're actually going after our Restorium, which is our old folks' home.
Oh, okay. You mentioned at the beginning that your area is a very conservative area, but I am assuming that not everybody in the community was aligned with these groups that you're talking about. In fact, one of the pictures we even have, they had a quiet protest, a read-in, and there were, self-identified conservatives in that supporting you and the library. But do you have any sense of sort of proportionally in the community, you had their support versus was the group that was attacking you a vocal minority? Do you think they did represent a large portion of the community? What's your sense of that?
So I really think that it is conservative, to be sure, but in that more traditional sense of what a conservative is. Not the group that we're dealing with are radicalized, and so that should never be. When I say Christian nationalist, that is not to say that this is Christianity. This is their faction of it, which is, if you have to believe exactly like they believe, or else you're a part of the problem. So if you don't believe or go to their church and you go to, say, the Lutheran church, then you're a part of the problem. So we need to, make sure that we understand that. So they are conservative, and we have a much larger support, but what has happened is so many people, they don't get involved, right? And that's what's unfortunate. So you go about your life, you're busy, you just enjoy your neighbors, and this is just the library's always been here, our schools have always been here, people don't get involved. Well, people who are intent on taking over have done so. So they get in, and they're directed to get involved in local politics. It is absolutely their imperative. They are told to vote. They are told how they're going to vote. They take over boards. They've taken over school boards, hospital boards, library boards. This is happening across the country. I think there's a couple of things that makes what's happening in North Idaho interesting, which is the American Redoubt is being watched as a potential domestic terrorist group, and the Lordship Church, which has come after the library, is on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate group watch list, and they're very active in our community. The other thing is our library doesn't have any of the books, well, except for now, Who Was Frederick Douglass, in our collection. So they're not even hiding behind that veneer of it being about banning books. This is about whose stories gets told, what information a community is allowed access to, who's allowed to hold these positions, and they have been very effective.
Can you describe a little bit the moment when you had enough? What led up to it? What was your state of mind when you said, I can't do this anymore?
So a couple of things, just the stress at home, but I have a 17-year-old son at home, and he's getting to the point where, he doesn't even you can't go out in the yard by yourself, and you can't go to the store by yourself, and he's starting to get this anger and this defensiveness that has never been part of his character. And so that was something that just had to stop. And it's just exhausting to be harassed personally and then at work. FOIA requests, so the Freedom of Information requests start pouring in, that they want every single document that has the word shelf, child, children, American Library Association, Michael. It was like 50 words, so I would still be trapped in the library trying to print off all this information. So it was getting to the point where I couldn't do my job anymore. But the real clincher was August 1st, the library got a letter from the Idaho County's Risk Management Program, ICRIMP, which it provides our insurance, that due to increased risk factors, they would not be renewing the insurance policy for the library, which now means the library has no insurance coverage, which isn't just like a house, insurance policy. It's also for your directors and officers. It is for errors and omissions. It's for your fiduciary responsibility. So without that coverage, we're all exposed. And so I did write a lovely narrative letting them know that it was really important that the library be there to serve the community, and they did offer an extension of coverage so the board could continue to look for outside insurance. But that was really it. When your insurance company is like, yeah, that's just too much, we're out.
Yeah. So a lot of the rhetoric that gets used focuses on, maybe entirely, on children, that we need to protect children. And I think most people, that sounds reasonable. We do need to protect children. And I think most people think that there is content that whatever language they would use might potentially harm children, might be dangerous for children, might not be good for children. So do you give any credence to those kinds of concerns? One woman at the board said, what is the library doing to protect children? So I guess I would just turn that question over to you. What does the library do to protect children? And are those not legitimate concerns, just wanting to keep our children safe?
Well, absolutely. I mean, everybody wants to keep, even me. It's like if somebody comes up to you, do you want your child to have access to pornography? I'm like, absolutely, I do not want my child to have access to pornography. But the funny thing is there's no pornography in a library. Well, Harlequin romance novels, believe it or not, the definition by Webster is intent to arouse.
Yeah.
That's not an anatomy book. That's a Harlequin romance. So I absolutely have to say that on the surface, it sounds really good. And, the libraries are always set up in age-appropriate categories. And so like at our library, the children's library is downstairs, like picture books, and the junior fiction, junior nonfiction is in one section. Young adult is in the next room. And then upstairs is the adult collection. So it is, again, it's a parent's job to monitor. It is not my job. A public library, and I think that that's an important distinction, is we're not a private library, we're not an academic library, we're not even a school library, we're a public library. So that means we should have something to offend everybody. I mean, that's like the fun little thing that gets said about public libraries. But it's for me to it's for a library to provide access to information, not to promote or deny access to information. That's your job as a parent, to monitor that. I need to make sure that my staff are adequately trained and that they've passed their background checks, that they are good at their jobs. It is my job to make sure that your child, if you don't come to pick your child up and they're under the age of 14, that I notify the police, that the building is safe. These are the things that we do at public institutions to make sure that minors are safe. But as far as access to information, that's your job. That's not my job.
So one other concern I wanted to raise, and this was another complaint that I heard a lot, which again, I raised this one in particular because I think most people would think, yeah, that doesn't necessarily sound unreasonable, which is that the content and the collections of the library should reflect the values of the community. I think somebody could hear that and think, yeah, that doesn't sound wrong. So, but then what is there a tension between that idea and the idea that you just mentioned, which is the library has something or has something to offend everyone? If the community says, we don't want that kind of content here, is it the library's job to listen to them and get rid of it, or how does that work?
No, I think that's a really fair question. And bigger libraries have, well, first of all, bigger buildings and bigger budgets and a more diversified population. So they might have larger collections, but a collection needs to be balanced. So that's always one of the biggest challenges of developing a collection. But it shouldn't restrict access to information. That's actually a First Amendment infringement. So if I was going, when you put information, and let's just say that a story, well, Frederick Douglass, people in Idaho don't want him even talked about. Well, he's a historical figure, and the fact that he was a man of color has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not he has a place on our shelves. He's a historical figure, and so he should be there. And that's, so you kind of have to look at that. It's like you have to have a balance. And again, we're not pushing an ideology. And just having access to information is not dangerous. Not having access to information or restricted access, that's what tyranny does. That's not democracy. That's totalitarianism.
You've mentioned this didn't just happen to you and to your library. You use the phrase the silent majority. What can people do? So people who hear your story and what happened to you and to your library, I guess one question is what might they be on the lookout to know if this is on the rise in their community? And then is there anything that they can do to support their library?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, even though I have been accused of being a witch, but really it's just because I can fold fitted sheets. That only a witch can do that. So the thing that I would have to say is, as a community, get involved. It's a huge ask. We're all busy. Everybody has things they'd rather be doing. I mean, this is a pretty good crowd to come out on a Thursday night at 7:00. And that's so important. So get involved. Pay attention, occasionally show up to a library, a school board meeting, a hospital board meeting, because this is where the extremists start to take over. And if you're not out voting, and if you're not involved, and if you're not paying attention, at some point you won't get to say anything anymore.
I knew about libraries, I've heard about school boards, I would not have anticipated hospitals and retirement centers.
Yeah. And we have a cute little museum in Bonners Ferry, and just a couple of months ago, they got a letter from a woman who wanted to know why there was 1940s pornography on the wall. They're coming for the museum.
Okay, wow.
It really was like the type of pinup girl that they used to put on the sides of airplanes is really what it was, but that's 1940s pornography.
I'm going to turn it over to audience Q&A. So in just a moment. Before that, I have just a final quick personal question for you, which is what is next for you?
I'm going to raise ducks.
Yeah, good.
No, in all seriousness, I don't know. And that's part of what's like super scary about quitting. That was going to be my job. I was going to retire from being a library director, and now I don't know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions in the audience? If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and you can ask your question, and then I'll repeat it. This is being streamed, so I'm going to keep it in the microphone so anybody streaming can hear. Yeah, up in the front.
First of all, you didn't introduce yourself, and I'm curious as to who you are.
Oh my gosh, how embarrassing. My name is Shane Gronholtz. I'm the current affairs specialist here at Spokane Public Library. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
But my question to Kimber is now, what state is your library in? Since you've left and two of your staff left, did that vocal minority take over?
So I'm going to repeat the question really quick. So she asked, what is the state of the library now that Kimber has left and three other employees, I'm sorry. What is the state of the library now?
So and the board is still being recalled, or that they're still fighting to get that in the May ballot. So there's no director. There are 3 staff left there. Hours have been cut. And so they're just kind of trying to just keep it open so people can check books in and out. But there's no more programming. There's really not anything going on.
3 employees?
3 employees.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. Any other questions anybody wants? Yes, in the back there? In the middle, I suppose? Yeah. He asked how long has Bonner's Ferry been having this problem? With the library?
With the library or with radicals historically? Okay. So for the library, I am not actually sure how long that this has been brewing. Like I said, I had come in December, and up until that I had worked in the Sandpoint Library, and the only time, and there are these people in that county as well, and I did experience it there, but through the COVID restrictions, through the mask restrictions. What was scary there is we didn't have full police support, and at one point a police officer allowed the crowd to mob in, and I got pushed out of the way by a rather large man, and so that was very scary. In Bonner's Ferry, the police have been super supportive of taking our safety very seriously, so that's been good. But we are seeing a rise in that when you or in that extremism up there. And at one point there was a man, he calls himself Bob Sergeant Slaughter, because that's somebody's real name on Facebook. And he had said that the American Redoubters are there, and they're dug in like ticks, and more of them are coming. So I don't know how long it's been festering, but it keeps that they're being marketed to come for this new American Redoubt. And then historically, Ruby Ridge is right down the road so that's in Naples, which is only about 15 miles away from Bonner's Ferry. Pattyhurst, that was in North Idaho. There was, in the 1800s, a rather unfortunate thing with the Mormon Church. That was a little further south in Idaho. Of course, the Aryan Nations. So there's several militant groups that are up in North Idaho. So it's kind of a hotbed of extremism.
Question up here in the front?
Well, it's more of a comment. I noticed on your Trumper sign at the beginning, it says love guns and love thy neighbor. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very ironic, because they obviously don't love their neighbor. Mm-hmm.
Sir, up in the front?
Can I give a little background? I'm from Bonner's Ferry. Been there off and on for 60 years. I just moved to Spokane. I was a Lutheran pastor there. Came in '77. And at that time, the John Birch Society was very strong. It slowly dissipated, but we had a threat from Reverend Miles in Michigan, who had a group like was down at Hayden Lake, or Hayden. And he somehow publicly threatened to come to Boundary County and bring his group with him. The county commissioners got a hold of that information and asked the Ministerial Association to start a human rights task force. And so we did. And we sent letters to Reverend Miles through the commissioners saying you have every right to come, but we'd like to let you know that you will not be entirely accepted in coming to this area. It worked. He decided not to come. Well, he ended up in jail back there in Michigan, too, for some of his behavior. But we had Randy Weaver show up at our Human Rights Task meeting. We had an armed group of militants come from Montana to our meetings. It was not comfortable at all, but we persisted. And now there is a Human Rights Task Force still in Bonners Ferry. And
Meeting is tomorrow.
yeah, and at the Lutheran Church where I was at, and they are much more active now than we were. We were just beginners when Coeur d'Alene was having all of its problems.
The president of the John Birch Society in the area is the county commissioner that just took over one of the seats. So right in Tim Bertling.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different commission now.
The Birch Society did disappear, basically. It was on my church council. It was in a lot of different.
They're back in full force.
Anyway, the one who brought it back was one of the pastors. He is a Presbyterian pastor by claim, but he does not belong to the National Association of that. But he is the one who sponsored those folks to come back. He is the fellow who has got himself in as chaplain for several organizations, mainly the sheriffs and things like that. They did not know what he was up to, but it's just getting in on the ground level and then doing. And so that group is now being sponsored by him and his church. And the other one is the Redoubt. That came about 2 years before I left Bonners Ferry. And again, came in rather quietly, set up, bought a building, and set up a store, very innocuous and innocent, and then slowly started doing this stuff that you're experiencing now. So it has been there in a sense for a long, long time, but it's ebbed. And
They also now are getting a lot of outside funding. And so Idaho is being considered, or at least what's happening up there is being considered a bellwether. So how far can they take this? If it works here, how far can they then roll it out? This is part of that national, extremist movement. So if it works there, it could trigger, roll down to the next small, community, and it's pretty insidious.
those people know how to read the laws,
Right.
take advantage of all little quirks in the laws.
Yes.
There's a question right there. Yeah. Yep. You. Yep. Yeah. Did you want to keep going? So she's asking about when this is happening in other areas in the country, asking a little bit more about those other library situations. Do they tend to be rural? Are they getting other kinds of funding? Now, of course, you lived in Boundary County, but to the extent that you have any insight into what's going on more nationally, what's the state of play with these other libraries?
So that's a real, and I don't have like hard numbers for you. Actually, see, that would be a good one to put in a slide. I was like, should I put together slides? That would have been a good question. So small towns are easier to take over boards and make bigger noise. It's not these specific groups across the whole country. It is, they're considered, a lot of them are grassroots, like No Left Turn in Education, Moms for Liberty. So they're going after schools and libraries. They have really consistent messaging. And it's not just in small towns, just in Coeur d'Alene, they've had quite a lot of problems. They had the Coeur d'Alene Public Library System. They had a librarian quit as well a while ago. She moved to Texas, which I think is interesting, but it's happening in bigger communities as well. And I know that in a lot of libraries, like the Drag Queen Story Time, I know that there was some negativity here. This would be considered a bigger city. In bigger cities across the whole country, Proud Boys have showed up armed. Children have had to be sequestered in rooms. They show up with masks and guns, and that's been happening in bigger cities. What happened in Idaho is the Idaho Commission for Libraries lost about half of its funding because it wouldn't restrict LGBTQ plus specifically materials. And so what that really meant was, how much access that rural communities get to, like digital media, stuff like that. So universities are losing funding for some of this. So it's kind of everywhere, every finger. It is always this far, far right faction that is doing it, though not always under the same names as what we're dealing with in Boundary County. We're special.
Yeah, up front.
Kimber, do you think that the silent majority has become too complacent? That we've had so many things all over the years that we just think it'll never end? And we're letting the far right just take over?
So she asked, has the silent majority become complacent?
I would say absolutely. And that's not just my opinion, because I've had a lot of people who, like in the read-in, this group right here, they consider themselves the silent majority, and then that's what they've said. They've been quiet for too long. And this is scary, because when you're going up against somebody who, in their words, says, we have guns and we're ready to start killing liberals, give us the word. So if you stand up against them, even if you're conservative and you just want to protect people's freedoms, whether they be First Amendment or 14th Amendment, but it goes against their ideology and they're standing there armed, that is scary. And so it's easy to be silenced. But in our community, what's happened to the library is people are out and they're loud and they're pushing back. Of course, these people are pushing back a little harder. Should I share our fun news that happened before I came on stage?
Sure, yeah, if you'd like to, yes.
Maybe we should have done it for dramatic effect. I was served a tort claim while I was waiting to come on stage. By part of these radicalized, people to take down the library. So it was just an amendment to an existing tort claim because I want to suppress their First Amendment rights.
Yeah, there was
Shame
a process server here, just like you see in the movies. I see in the movies, handing the papers.
We could have had it happen for dramatic effect up here, but we thought we'd spare you all that.
Yeah, sir, in the back. Uh-huh.
It's in case you get a bloody nose. They work spectacularly. Oh, indeed. Mm-hmm.
They're for anybody.
Do you have a wife? She might need one. Anyway, sir?
Okay, thank you. Yes, in the back. So you're asking, he said Northern Idaho has always been a hotbed for, can you say the phrase again? For Christian fundamentalism. So you're getting some support from the community now. Where do you think that's coming from?
That's a really good question. It's because there's so many, and I hate to even say this because I'm a new person to North Idaho, but it's because they're actually being marketed to this Christian nationalist movement is marketing Idaho as a place for true patriots. And so we're seeing a huge influx of new people with a more radicalized ideology. And so I think that where there have been some people with more, fundamentalist views, well, now there's more people moving in, and the ones that were there before, instead of just being quiet, now they're feeling like they're more normalized and they can have a voice. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, it's...
Yeah, I don't think we've mentioned QAnon explicitly, either one of us, but it did make me wonder. Now, it's a little bit unfortunate because the word groomer has become, it has become so expanded, and people sort of use it as a joke now. But I do know that word comes up on, certain QAnon forums, but they use it too. So I was wondering, is there any connection between these groups and QAnon, or...
I haven't taken a dive down that rabbit hole. I'm almost certain that there is, but I don't do social media, and I don't. And another fun joke is because I'd been labeled a groomer, nobody knows what that means. So I had T-shirts made that said "Public Libraries Grooming Bibliophiles since 1833."
Other questions in the audience? All right, I think we'll, yeah. Oh, yeah, one last one.
You may have alluded to this already because you said the police were supportive, but you've obviously been threatened several times with death. And so have the police received these death threats and taken them seriously?
So they have,
Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. I'm falling asleep on the job. She asked if the police in your community have taken the threats against you, particularly the ones against your life. How have they responded to those?
So they have taken them seriously, and in July, after the lady blew the shofar and somebody had said that they were in evidence of somebody who was going to show up and do harm at the library board meeting, they were like, if you guys don't have actual business, please consider canceling that meeting. And so we did. Where this group and somebody had said they know how to use the law, they also know how to make their threats. So if you tell me that you're going to put if you shall harm these small children, a millstone will be put around your neck and you'll be cast into the sea. Well, as long as you follow it up with Matthew... now they're just quoting scripture at you. And so they're really very, very good about that. So they threaten you, and everybody knows it's a threat, but it's not an actionable threat. So, fun.
Fun.
Yeah.
Kimber, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate your courage in speaking out and your willingness to share your time and your story with us. I'm really, really grateful, and I know they are all too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shane. And thank you, everybody, for spending Thursday with us.